We live in an incredible world. It's just full of visual riches. I took this picture in northern Arizona, near where I grew up, and you can see how incredible it looks. You have all the colors, textures, shapes, reflections that anytime we go outside, we can see and we can enjoy. However, imagine losing access to that. Approximately 285 million people in the world have some form of visual impairment. So if you were to become blind, what would you miss? I often ask people this, and a number of people will say television, or something like that they feel they can't go without. But I think most of you are probably thinking of something else, like the face of a loved one, or perhaps a sunset, or reading a book. Vision is something that is central to a lot of our lives. Now, of course, if you ask a congenitally blind person, a person who's born blind, who's never had vision, they obviously don't miss it. They've never experienced it. Yet they also have this incredibly rich world that they get through hearing, through smell, through the movement they have through the world, through how things feel. So there's a whole other world out there. And in my research, which I carry out with students, postgraduate students, and scientists of all different levels, including some who just happen to be visually impaired as well, we're examining the ways blindness can tell us what it means to see. And through that, we're also trying to develop technology to find ways to try and bring vision to those who want it. But we need some place to start. If we're trying to create technology to allow people to see, we have to ask this really basic question. What does it mean to see? Well, David Marr, in his book Vision, said this: the plain man's answer in Aristotle's too is to know what is where by looking. Now, if you think about those things that you would miss if you lost vision, you probably weren't exactly thinking that. You're probably thinking of something else. However, this simple quote, this idea, what is where by looking, is really the fundamental thing that vision is allowing us to do. We can sense things that are silent and far away, beyond what we can touch. And once we know what's there, then we can have an emotional response to it. You can recognize the face of someone you love and have some feeling about that. And so although in some ways this might be a simple explanation of what it might mean to see, it's a good starting point. And it's where we've started with some of our research. So in one such study, we do exactly this. We try and find out what is where. And we do this by taking, in this image, just standard things you might have around the house, placing them in a room, having people learn what is where, and then testing them to see how they're able to represent that information in their mind. Now, if you take a sighted person and you have them stand in the corner of the room facing the objects from this direction, they'll look at all the objects, and then later we'll test them to see how they've remembered those objects and where they are. And what we find is this: sighted people are often representing these objects in their mind with a map from a direction where this red arrow is pointing that they never actually faced. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that if you take this perspective, you'll see you have these nice columns and rows of objects that allow you to represent where they are relative to each other. And so sighted people will create this map in their mind, even if they never saw things from that perspective. Now, here's something interesting. If you blindfold those sighted people, and instead take them from the bottom of the image and have them walk to the objects one at a time, going back to the starting point, walking to another object, touching them to find out what they are, and then later testing them, what you find is they do exactly the same thing. With careful testing, you can again find that they're representing the objects from this direction that they never approached the objects. They're creating this map once again. And we find the same thing with late blind individuals, those who become blind later in life but have had some visual experience. However, if we bring in congenitally blind people and have them do the same test. Have them walk to each object one after another, and then we test them, we find something different. They instead remember a route. They remember the perspective from where they started from, and remember where all the objects are relative to that point. So this difference between how the congenitally blind represent and remember what is where, and how those who have had visual experience are able to remember this, shows us something interesting about vision. So besides telling us where silent objects are in the distance, vision allows us to represent information in parallel at the same time. And by being able to do that, we can think about how these objects' locations relate to one another and create a map, sort of a bird's eye view, a perspective from above that can be rotated in our mind. And so vision seems to be important for creating these sorts of maps. And in fact, when we literally do brain mapping, when we look for maps within areas of the brain for representing sensory information, we find striking differences in how those who have had some visual experience, such as the late blind, who are here on the left, compare to the congenitally blind, those who have had no visual experience. And the maps in the brain for just very basic sensory information, such as touch, are very different. And so it seems that vision, it provides a basis for creating a lot of maps in the brain that allow our mind to manipulate information in some ways. So vision is important for being able to create these things and being able to represent these things. So we know vision is important for picking up on distant, quiet things, and we can represent those things together at the same time and create these maps. But let's say we want some way to try and provide vision again to those who have lost it. Well, the technology I work with is in a class of devices called sensory-substitution devices. The idea is that if you're missing one sense, perhaps you can translate that information into a format another sense can process. And so if you think about it, hearing is pretty good at detecting things that are far away as long as they make noise. And we can also process things through sound all at the same time. If you think about listening to music, you can hear a lot of different aspects of the music all at the same time. And so in my work with computer scientists and engineers, we're trying to see, well, can we see through our ears? Is there some way we can represent information that normally isn't an image in sound? Well, here's a little primer on how to do that, how to see with sound. I work with a device called the Voice, invented by a Dutch engineer, Peter Mayer, and it works like this. You have to have some sort of image capturing device, like a camera, in this case, in spy sunglasses. So you can buy these on the internet. And they have just a small camera in the bridge of the nose. And you take that image, and the software processes it, and it scans that image from left to right. And as it scans from left to right, it turns all those parts in the image that are high into high notes, or high pitch. Anything that's low is a low pitch, or a low note. You get the left to right location from that scan as it goes from left to right. And parts that are bright are loud, and parts that are dark are quiet. So let me give you an example here. It's going to scan from left to right, and what you hear is that it starts high at the top left. It goes down and back up again. So you hear the pitch go from high to low to high as it scans from left to right. You get one more time here. And so it's pretty simple. Now, I have to admit, when I first heard this, particularly when I took this device and went outside to a complicated area with trees, lots of light, and it sounded like a science fiction special effect, I thought this was crazy. There's no way this is going to work. How can you take all the complexities, all the visual richness of an image and translate it into sound? And so what I needed to do is I needed to see it for myself. And here's an example where I saw it. This person had been training with the device for just a couple hours of a day for 1 week. And watch the way he is able to hone in just by listening to the object and grab it with excellent accuracy. So not only did I see it with my own eyes, I also heard it with my own ears. I tried it myself. And I found that just a couple of hours a day, after a week, I could recognize real objects. not just sort of that simple letter V there. I could tell a mug apart from a glass, or a whisk apart from a brush. The whole reason this works is because even though we seem to think we see with our eyes, we actually see with our brain. Our eyes are just providing the information, and our brain sorts out all of that information and makes sense of it and gives us that feeling of seeing. And so sensory substitution, the idea is we can provide auditory information that normally goes to these areas of the brain near our ears, and our brain, once it figures out that's representing something different, something far away, something silent, the brain is able to reroute that information to the back of our head, back where we have our visual cortex. And even in blind individuals, the area of the brain that's normally called the visual cortex is recruited for seeing with these sounds. And so in that way, we're able to actually have visual behaviors, and some people even report being able to see images in their mind as they listen to this. So do you want to try it? Good. So what I'm going to do is I have three objects up here on the screen, a square, a circle, and a diagonal line. I'm going to play you one sound, and I want you to try and figure out which of the three objects it is. So remember, it's going to scan the object from left to right. One more time. Okay, does anyone think they know what it is? Okay, on the count of three, say out loud what you think it is. 1, 2, 3. The line, that's right. Brilliant. See, you can already do it. That's fantastic. That's right, it's the diagonal line. In some ways, it's very simple, and being able to build up to complex things just takes time. So here's an example of a person who's using the device for less than an hour and is blindfolded, cannot perceive any light at all, and is just using the device to avoid an obstacle in his path. So at this point, let me just review a couple of things I've talked about already. First of all, blindness teaches us what it means to see. It gives us an idea of how vision is useful for representing far-off objects in parallel, together at once, and this allows us to make maps of the environment. Also, psychologists, neuroscientists, and engineers are working together to develop visual rehabilitation technology and tools. Now, it's important that this is an interdisciplinary effort because the limitations are not just technological, they're perceptual, they're attentional, they're cognitive. There are human limitations, and there are limitations of what the brain can do that we need to understand in order to make technology like this work. But I don't want you to finish watching this talk and just leave with those 2 points. First, considering what blindness teaches us about what it means to see, consider the issue, well, who is blind? As I mentioned earlier, if you ask a congenitally blind person, do you wish you could see, they would probably tell you no. Because they have this incredibly rich world that's appealing to all their other senses. I mean, how often do we fail to realize what we could be hearing around us? Or what we're feeling at the moment. So if you're sitting down right now, feeling the chair that's underneath you. Or thinking about the smells or the other things you could be touching. Furthermore, we have this interdisciplinary effort to develop this technology. However, we should also think about what we as a society value. What do you value? Do you value accessibility or inclusivity? The whole reason we're making technology like this is because we have this world that's built for those who can see, those who can hear, those who are able to move freely. And we have to build technology to make it accessible to people. But instead, we can design our world differently. We can make it inclusive. We can try and build a world that appeals to all of our senses and to all people, no matter how they have to move. So therefore, I want you to take away those points as well, and I also want to give you something to do. I want to give you a mission. When I'm finished, I want you to take what I've talked about, go out and see, hear, smell, and sense the world in a new way. Think about all the multisensory aspects you might be missing out on and never realized it. Also, as you're doing that, I want you to observe the ways and where we can make society more inclusive. As you start paying attention to these non-visual aspects of your world, perhaps you'll realize instead of building a world that puts up barriers between us and other people, maybe there are ways we can make everything inclusive and allow others, regardless of any sensory, motor, or mental impairment, to come along with us on our journey through life. Now, it's your turn. Thank you.